She was rejected on a Christmas blind date until a little girl asked, "Can you be my new mom?" The restaurant glowed with holiday warmth as Margaret Chun smoothed her emerald dress one more time. At 58, she had almost talked herself out of this blind date 3 times that morning. Her daughter Emily had insisted, though, practically begging her to give love another chance. After 5 years of widowhood, Margaret watched couples laughing over candlelight, their faces bright with Christmas joy. She checked her watch. Her date was 20 minutes late. The familiar ache of disappointment began settling in her chest like an old friend she wished would stop visiting. Then she saw him. A tall man in his early 60s strode through the entrance, his silver-streaked hair catching the soft light. But he wasn't alone. A small girl, perhaps 4 years old, clutched his hand. Her blonde hair fell in soft waves, and she wore a red velvet dress that matched the Christmas decorations perfectly. In her other arm, she held a worn teddy bear close to her chest. Margaret's stomach dropped. This wasn't what she had expected at all. The man approached her table, his expression caught between apologetic and resigned. "Margaret, I'm David Morrison. I am so incredibly sorry about this." She stood, trying to hide her confusion. "It's nice to meet you." David glanced down at the little girl. "This is my granddaughter, Ruby." There was a situation with the babysitter and I had no one else to call. "I completely understand if you want to reschedule or just forget the whole thing. This isn't fair to you." Margaret looked at the child. Ruby stared up at her with enormous blue eyes that held something Margaret recognized immediately. Loneliness. The kind that lives deep in a child's heart when the world has already taught them that people leave. "Hello, Ruby," Margaret said softly, kneeling down to the girl's level despite the formal dress. "That's a beautiful bear you have there." Ruby held the toy tighter but didn't speak. "David is Saiji. She doesn't talk much these days. We're working through some things." The pain in his voice told Margaret there was a story there, one filled with loss and struggle. "Well," Margaret said, rising and gesturing to the table, "I think there's room for 3 tonight, if that's all right with you." "Ruby." David's expression shifted to surprise, then gratitude. "Are you sure? Really? We can leave." Margaret smiled, thinking of all the Christmas dinners she had spent alone, pretending she wasn't waiting for her late husband to walk through the door. "I'm very sure." "Please, sit down." As they settled into their seats, Ruby climbing into a chair between them, Margaret noticed how David's shoulders relaxed slightly. He had the weathered look of someone who had carried heavy burdens, but his eyes were kind. Tired, but kind. "So," Margaret began, after they had ordered, "tell me about yourself, David. The real story, not the rehearsed first date version." David laughed, a warm sound that made Ruby glance up at him. "The real story. That's refreshingly direct. At our age, we don't have time for anything else," Margaret said. He nodded slowly. "Fair enough. I'm 62, retired construction manager, widowed 8 years ago. I have one son, Thomas, who is Ruby's father." He paused, his hand moving unconsciously to rest on Ruby's shoulder. "Thomas and his wife Sarah died in a car accident 14 months ago. Ruby came to live with me. We've been figuring it out together ever since." Margaret's heart clenched. She reached across the table without thinking, her hand covering his. "I'm so sorry. That's unimaginable. Some days are better than others," David said quietly. "Today was supposed to be a better one. My sister promised she could watch Ruby. Then her own grandkids got sick, and I had already canceled on you twice before. And I thought maybe Ruby and I just need to accept that this is our life now." "What do you mean? That dating, moving forward, having any kind of personal life outside of being a guardian, that maybe it's not in the cards. She needs stability, not some grandfather trying to juggle a social life." Margaret glanced at Ruby, who was making her teddy bear walk across the table. "May I tell you something I learned after my husband died? Please! For 3 years, I convinced myself that I had to choose between honoring his memory and living my own life. My daughter finally sat me down and said something I'll never forget. She said that love doesn't run out, that opening your heart to new experiences doesn't mean closing it to old memories. Ruby needs you steady and present, yes, but she also needs you whole. And sometimes being whole means letting yourself be more than just one thing." David's eyes glistened slightly. "That's wise. My daughter is very smart. I should listen to her more often." They ordered dinner, and Margaret made a point of including Ruby in the conversation, asking simple questions about her teddy bear, about what she liked to do, about whether she enjoyed the Christmas lights. Ruby didn't answer with words, but she began to respond with small nods and head shakes, even offering a tiny smile when Margaret asked if the bear's name was Mr. Close. David said, "It's Captain's. He's very important." As dinner arrived, Margaret noticed Ruby watching her with those penetrating blue eyes. There was something the child wanted to say. She could tell. That same expression she had seen in her own daughter's face decades ago when Emily was working up the courage to ask for something she feared would be denied. They ate slowly, the conversation flowing more naturally than Margaret had expected. David told stories about job sites and the characters he had worked with over the years. Margaret shared memories of her teaching career. 33 years of middle school. English that had left her with an endless supply of both heartwarming and hilarious student moments. "Did you ever want to do anything else?" David asked. "Oh, constantly." Margaret laughed. "Every journey. Fantasized about becoming a travel writer or opening a bookshop by the sea. But September would come around, and those kids would walk back into my classroom, and I remembered why I stayed. Some of us are meant to be anchors for other people. There's honor in that." David looked at her with something that made Margaret's breath catch. Recognition. The look of someone who understands exactly what you mean because they've lived it too. Ruby had finished most of her chicken fingers. It was now making Captain Snuggles dance between the salt and pepper shakers. Margaret watched her with a gentle ache. This little girl had lost so much. Her whole world had changed in an instant. And here she was, trying to find joy in a teddy bear dance while surrounded by strangers in a restaurant full of happy families. Then Ruby turned to Margaret, and in a voice so soft, it was almost a whisper, asked, "Do you like Christmas?" It was the first time she'd spoken all evening. "I love Christmas," Margaret answered, matching the girl's quiet tone. "Do you?" "Ruby? Nada. Mama used to make cookies. The ones with frosting." David's hand froze halfway to his water glass. Margaret could see the emotion working across his face. Ruby rarely mentioned her mother. "Sugar cookies?" Margaret asked gently. Another nod. "Those are my favorite kind to make. The secret is using real butter and adding just a tiny bit of almond extract. It makes all the difference." Ruby considered this seriously. "Do you have a little girl?" "I have a grown-up daughter named Emily. She's 32 now, but I remember when she was your size. We would make cookies every Christmas Eve." "Does she still make them with you?" Margaret smiled, though it was bittersweet. "Sometimes. But she's very busy with her own life now. That's what happens. When children grow up, they spread their wings and fly." Ruby looked down at Captain Snuggles. Then, in a moment that seemed to stop tying itself, she slid out of her chair and walked around the table to stand next to Margaret. Without a word, she climbed up into Margaret's lap, settling there as naturally as if she had done it 100 times before. Margaret's arms came around the child instinctively. David started to speak, probably to apologize, but Margaret shook her head slightly. "Let this moment be what it needs to be." Ruby leaned back against Margaret's chest, still holding her bear, and looked up at her. "Can you be My new mom. The question hung in the air like snowflakes suspended in lamplight. Margaret felt tears prick her eyes. She looked at David, who had his hand over his mouth, his own eyes wet. This precious child, who had lost everything, was asking the impossible in the most heartbreakingly simple way. "Oh, sweetheart," Margaret whispered, holding Ruby closer. "I would be honored to be your friend, someone you can talk to and make cookies with, and who will always be happy to see you, but not a mom." Ruby's voice was so small. Margaret chose her words carefully, knowing they mattered more than perhaps any she had ever spoken. "Your mom loved you so much, Ruby. So much that her love is still here, still surrounding you, even though you can't see her. Nobody can replace that. But love is a funny thing. There's always room for more. So maybe I can be someone special in your life, someone who cares about you and wants to spend time with you. Would that be okay?" Ruby thought about this, then nodded against Margaret's shoulder. "Okay. Will you help me make cookies?" "Absolutely. We can make a whole army of cookies if you want, with frosting. With so much frosting that Captain Snuggles will be jealous." That earned a small giggle, the sound like bells in the warm restaurant air. David wiped his eyes unashamedly. "I don't know what to say." Margaret met his gaze over Ruby's head. "Say, you'll let me see you both again? Properly this time?" I think Ruby might stage a revolt if I said no. They stayed until the restaurant began preparing for closing, talking and laughing, while Ruby dozed against Margaret's chest. Other diners smiled at them as they passed, seeing what looked like a family enjoying Christmas together. And maybe, Margaret thought, that's exactly what they were becoming. Not in the traditional way, not through the paths anyone would have planned, but through the strange and beautiful way that hearts recognize each other across the distance of loss and loneliness. When they finally stood to leave, Ruby held both their hands, creating a bridge between them. As they walked out into the December night, snow began to fall in soft, white drifts. Ruby tilted her face up to catch snowflakes on her tongue, and David looked at Margaret with an expression that promised this was not an ending, but a beginning. Sometimes the family we meet arrives in the most unexpected moments, wearing emerald dresses and carrying worn teddy bears. Sometimes love doesn't look like we imagined it would. Sometimes it looks like a little girl brave enough to ask for what she needs, and two people kind enough to say yes. Margaret went home that night feeling lighter than she had in years. Not because she had found romance, though perhaps that would come, but because she had found purpose again. She had found that place where she could be an anchor for someone who desperately needed one. The next day, she called David. "How do you both feel about making cookies this Saturday?" His answer was everything she hoped it would be. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe for more stories about kindness, connection, and the beautiful ways love finds us when we least expect it. Leave a comment below telling us about a time when an unexpected connection changed your life. Your story might inspire someone else who needs to hear it today.